You know, I can tell you as a person who has a qualified high-tech business that a cap doesn't make sense to me. I don't know how, the problem I have with it is it would be a gold rush mentality. I don't know how you could administer that correctly because as a person who raises capital in Hawaii, it's a very difficult process. It is extremely difficult to raise money from investors, okay, to put into these risky ventures that you have, and they are risky. Yeah. So when you cap it, suddenly you have to try and balance out, well, I don't know how much I'm going to get in terms of investment, yet I have to try and reserve something. It's the only way I can think of how to do this is try to reserve it. So how do you balance that? So the cap, the administration of a cap would be, it's not clear in my mind how you can do that effectively.
I certainly agree, Jason. You know, you put a cap on there for a dollar amount, everybody has to rush like the Oklahoma land rush to get their piece of the cap. And it puts everything in discombobulation. It also allows for, what shall I say, political machinations in terms of getting the piece of the cap. Who is going to administer that? What is the procedure? This is not written down. Nobody has figured it out. And I can tell you it's not just a drafting problem. It's a very difficult, conceptual, systematic problem.
I mean, what is to prevent me to go up to the system and saying, I want $50 million of credits. I want to reserve $50 million of credits versus Jay, who says he wants, you know, $100 million in credits. How do we divvy that up? Everybody's going to jockey for something like this. I'm not sure how you would do this, other than just to really have real investment dollars, but you won't know that until you have it, and that's the problem.
Well, let me ask you this then. As a taxpayer, as a lawmaker, I want to know, kind of along the lines of what Gene's question was earlier, assessing how you know, Act 221 is going.
Absolutely.
What can you say about the assessment of Act 221? How do you know if it's working? If it's worth the dollars that we're putting into it?
Well, certainly you can measure two things. There's two measurements that I've seen when I've done this documentary on Act 221, and everybody talks about at least two things we can measure, which is how many credits we actually have issued from the Department of Taxation and how much investment went in. And the numbers, I believe, Jay, correct me if I'm wrong, I think it's about $1.2 billion was the investment side, and the credit side was about 400 million? 300 million. So if you said that it costs you 300 million, because that's what the tax credits are, but you got $1.2 billion, that's like a 3 to 1, 3 or 4 to 1. That's the cost and the benefit in a very simplistic model, because the true benefit is that $1 billion that came into the economy got multiplied when it went through the system. But that's very difficult to measure. So let's take the top figure, the $1 billion.
So, you know, this analysis comes from the tax office and the numbers. So it's $300 billion has been the cost to date, all the way through the system from the beginning.
300
million, sorry. And then 1.2 billion has been the investment that brought into Hawaii, which is remarkable. That's, what is that, 4 to 1. And then it's something like 1.4 billion has actually been put into the economy as a result of that investment. So what you have is an enormous benefit out of all of this. And I think people have to understand that when they try to pull the wings out of Act 221.
The difficulty
now,
is...
Gene, we've got about a minute left.
Because I think we should be watching as a sequel the documentary that you just said.
Definitely.
221. I mean, I think that's a great way of following up. But basically, it's the interpretation of the data and the quality of the data and how the heads have got to be put together and come out with some compromises, and that's probably where this is going to end up. So there's a lot of horse trading going on, but the government seems to get out the message, we want to have a spigot on, so whatever goes out, we'll be able to cut it off whenever we want to do it. And I know that's not good, according as you guys have just
Well, at all costs, we have to change the direction of the battleship, or we will be behind the 8 ball, we'll be backwater. And it's really important that we address this problem and broaden our economy.
But Gene, I want to add that Act 221 is a great program, but it's not something that should last forever. I know that. It needs to
How many more years?
That's a hard question. I don't know if I can give you an exact number, but certainly not now. We're at that critical juncture where we're about to really make or break the economy. So you can't take that away from it at this point. But certainly it needs to be planned out. And that's not what we're seeing.
Well, gentlemen, that's a great time to pause for a second. And I want to thank you for joining Focus on Finnegan. We will be back with probably part 2 of Act 221. Mahalo for joining us.